It's almost too perfect that the language of Beowulf could be mistaken for a Jedi giving grammatical side-eye. Old English, the mother tongue of England from around the year 500 to 1100, sounds absolutely wild to a modern ear, and lots of people online swear it's basically Yoda speak. So is there any truth to that? This is where things get deliciously nerdy, because unspooling the actual sound of Old English is less about green aliens and more about people speaking in what feels like a different dimension of English entirely. What we call Old English is not just early English spoken with a weirder accent. It's a language that sometimes puts its verbs at the end of the sentence, drops prepositions where we expect them, and uses endings on words that we haven't seen since Hobbiton. Here's the real twist: the word order that makes Yoda sound like a confused Shakespearean actor, strong with the force you are, did pop up in genuine Old English sentences. Linguist Peter Baker, who literally wrote the guide to Old English, points out that word order back then was flexible but not random. The rules were just different. In present-day English, you and I are stuck with subject, verb, object almost every time. The cat eats the mouse. Simple. In Old English, however, you might get, "See cat, that mouse eats," or sometimes even, "that mouse eats the cat," if the endings, called inflections, made it clear who did what. This meant you could shuffle the parts around for emphasis, kind of how Yoda does. And yet, the real Yoda move comes from a geeky linguistic trick called verb final order. Old English poetry loved throwing the verb at the very end, mostly to keep the alliteration humming along. So you could literally get, "A mighty king in the hall shouts." So far, so Yoda, right? Hold up though, here's where it starts getting messy. Not all Old English sounded like that, especially in the dirty business of regular conversation. Most ordinary sentences did stick with a more standard order: subject, then verb, then object. What makes it trippy is that writers could go full chaos mode when they felt poetic or when they wanted to get fancy with emphasis, and nobody would have batted an eye. Except, maybe the Vikings. Quick checkpoint. So far, we found that sometimes, sure, Old English lines up with the Yoda vibe when it moves verbs to the end or fusses with word order for effect. But what about the pronunciation? Because honestly, listen to Beowulf read aloud, and you won't be picturing a puppet in a swamp. Hwat, we Gardena in Gardagum, Fiod Kinninga Thrim Gefrunen, is how the epic poem actually starts. The sounds are chunkier, like someone mashing together German and Icelandic. Historian Eleanor Parker basically says that it would have struck even William the Conqueror's French ears as totally alien. Those winding, throaty consonants are a million miles from Star Wars dialect. And here's the kicker: Yoda's manner of speech actually comes from George Lucas playing with old Japanese translations and mixing in a bit of object-subject-verb order, a pattern found in lots of languages, including Japanese or Turkish, but only sometimes in Old English. So if your English ancestor time-traveled into a galaxy far, far away, they might freak out at how normal Yoda sounds compared to their own poetry, or not recognize him at all. Here's a wild story. The earliest English Bible, the Lindisfarne Gospels, often flips things around to stay true to the Latin word order, leading to lines like, "Then answered Jesus him." Not "Jesus answered him." Latin put the verb at the end, so they mirrored it. It's classic Yoda, centuries before the Empire Strikes Back. If you love seeing how these tiny, geeky twists in language spark massive confusion or delight, tap subscribe so you never miss the next oddball episode in language history. Anyway, the simple answer is, when poetry or translation demanded it, Old English could absolutely sound like Yoda. Most of the time, though, it was just another wildly complicated, rule-bending stage in the chaos that eventually birthed our own English, a tongue so we take for granted, but whose early form remains, frankly, stranger than any Jedi syntax could hope to be.